അപ്പോൾ ഇന്ന് നമ്മുടെ faculty is Dr. Feroz Kaliadan. Sir, actually, Shah is working as professor in Department of Dermatology and Venereology at Srinarayana Medical College. അപ്പോൾ സാറിനെ ഈ ഡെർമറ്റോളജി പറ്റി പറയുകയാണെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് ഡെർമറ്റോളജിയിൽ ഒരു ഫാക്കൽറ്റി കിട്ടാൻ നമുക്ക് അത്രയും ഡിഫിക്കൽട്ട് ആയിരുന്നു. ബിക്കോസ് ആസ് യു ഓൾ നോ, ക്രീം ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആളുകളാണ് ഡെർമറ്റോളജിക്ക് പോകുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ അത്രയും അക്കാഡമിക്കലി ദേ വിൽ ബി സോ മച്ച് എൻഗേജ്ഡ്. അപ്പൊ അവർക്ക് ഈ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ സമയമൊക്കെ പാടായിരിക്കും. സാറ് തന്നെ അക്കാഡമിക്കലി സാർ ഒരുപാട് പേപ്പേഴ്സും അതുപോലെ ഒരുപാട് പ്രോജക്ട്സിന്റെയും പാർട്ടാണ്. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ സാറ് വളരെ ബിസിയാണ്. പക്ഷെ എന്നിട്ടും സാറ് പറഞ്ഞ ഉടൻ തന്നെ വെരി വെരി enthusiastically സാറ് നമ്മുടെ ക്ലാസ് എടുത്തു തരാൻ സമ്മതിച്ചു. അപ്പൊ അതിനൊരു ബിഗ് താങ്ക്സ്. അപ്പൊ ഇന്നത്തെ സാറ് ട്രിവാൻഡ്രം മെഡിക്കൽ കോളേജിൽ അലുമിനിയാണ്. അതുപോലെ ഹി ടുക്ക് ഹിസ് MD ഫ്രം കോട്ടയം മെഡിക്കൽ കോളേജ് ആൻഡ് ഹി ഹാസ് 2 many degrees to his credit. അപ്പൊ അത് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അത്ര ഒരുപാട് പറയാനുണ്ട്. അപ്പൊ സാറിനെ അറിയാവുന്നവരെല്ലാം പറയുന്നത് അങ്ങനെയാണ്, സാറിന്റെ ഒരു ക്ലാസ് കിട്ടുക എന്നുള്ളത് വളരെ ഭാഗ്യമാണ്. അപ്പൊ നമുക്ക് ഡെർമറ്റോളജിക്ക് അറിയാം, നമുക്ക് 2 ക്ലാസ്സേ ഉള്ളൂ. സോ വലിയ ഡിഫിക്കൽട്ട് ആയിട്ടാണ് എല്ലാം കവർ ചെയ്യാന്നുള്ളത്. ബട്ട് സ്റ്റിൽ സാർ അത് ചെയ്യും. അപ്പോ ബിഗ് താങ്ക്സ്. ഓവർ ടു യു സർ.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sapna. Okay, so once again, it's a very informal session. So any point anybody wants to ask something, please put it in the chat box. Or we'll try to discuss that. Okay. One of the things said about dermatology is that dermatology is very simple. If it's wet, keep it dry. If it's dry, keep it wet. And to a certain extent that is true in conditions. But of course, dermatology is much beyond that. For the entrance sake, which goes a bit beyond just keeping it dry if it's wet and keeping dry if it's wet, or the other way around. Okay, so just quickly, dermatology, there's a huge variety of cases which you can see, right from the very, very common things like acne to malignancies. So this, for example, is the case of basal cell carcinoma. In between, you have a huge variety of inflammatory disorders like psoriasis over here. You have infectious conditions like warts. You have autoimmune conditions like vitiligo, blistering diseases like bullous pemphigoid. So there's a huge variety. And one very important thing about dermatology is the ability to recognize systemic conditions based on the dermatological presentation. So, for example, this is one classical scenario where you have a female with a rash on the face, and additional information given is that patient has got arthritis. So, what does that make you think of? Anybody want to put it on the chat? Very good. So everybody is uniformly saying SLE. So just that butterfly-shaped rash, female patient, arthritis, and then you look for other features, including renal involvement, the blood parameters, ANE positive, and so on. That kind of guides you towards the diagnosis of SLE. Okay. We also have few conditions which are probably not that common as it used to be, but they're still there and they're still important for the entrance. Okay, so one of this is this. So what you're seeing is hypopigmented lesion with a bit of raised borders. And towards the end stage, you have this kind of deformity. So when you put everything together, anything which comes to your mind, very good. So leprosy, okay, very good. So you can see the leonine facies over here. You can see the resorption digits. Again, we're not very common now, but still we have cases. So it's important to know about leprosy, and this is another area where you do get questions in the NEET PG. This is one area where you will not get questions, but probably it's one of the more interesting parts of dermatology, because this is where the money is, for good or for bad. So hair transplants, Botox fillers, lasers. We will not cover this because, if you look at the NEET PG questions, this has not really been asked at any stage. But of course, if we have time, we can discuss a bit about it towards the end. And the other thing is therapeutics, so therapy in dermatology. So, what used to be, earlier used to say that dermatology is a lot of Latin terms with an ounce of Vaseline. Vaseline and steroid. But now dermatological therapeutics has also advanced a lot, right? From topical to you have things like biologics and psoriasis and a lot of new drugs in between. So any idea what this condition is? Anybody who would like to attend? This was a famous case, a guy called Didi. He was known as a tree man for obvious reasons, because spindly panari, the growths were so prominent that they looked like the branches of a tree. Any guesses? Or I'll make it easier for you. Any idea which virus can be associated with this? Anybody? Okay, so this is something called epidermodysplasia verruciformis. It's a rare condition which is associated with wood. Okay, so a lot of people who answered it. Harsha, Soumya, EN106. Okay, good. So this is associated with human papillomavirus. The good thing is that even this now has treatment. Okay, so this is post-treatment with systemic retinoids. You can see that there's a dramatic improvement. In addition, there are lasers and all those stuff available. The bad thing for you is that you need to know a bit about dermatotherapeutics also to, to be able to answer all the questions in the exam. Okay, moving on. Now, normally dermatology for the NEET PG, basically, topics and basically questions which okay. So if you cover these topics, which, if you have one of those handbooks, I won't name the handbook, but there are a lot of handbooks available for dermatology for the NEET PG. Those handbooks you can actually finish in around 3 or 4 days. And the good thing is that that is good enough to give you that whole set of dermatology questions. So usually there are around 5 or 10 questions which are asked in dermatology. The complete the cover the. So these are what we would call as a high yield areas. And what we'll do today is we'll try to cover some of those. So acne, vitiligo, papilloscopic disorders, including lichen planus, dermatitis eczema, and vesicular bullous lesions. So we try to cover quickly today. And whatever is remaining, we will try to cover in the next class. Okay. One of the issues now with NEET PG, especially in dermatology, is that they've started asking questions with images. So earlier, it used to be descriptions. Now it is images, maybe with a bit of description added. So just quickly, you could revise your memory regarding the primary lesions in dermatology. Now, the idea of description is that person to whom you're describing the skin lesions should be able to get a mental picture of what you're talking about without seeing the patient. Okay, so it should be as specific as possible. At the end, we use certain terms. So the commonest term is something which is a flat lesion. Okay, so forget the diagnosis now, but E lesion and the pattern, any lesion which is flat, it could be a change in color or texture as compared to the surrounding skin. That is called it's called a macule. So a flat lesion, okay, irrespective of the size, we generally label it as a macule. Okay. See the lesion over here. It's a flat lesion. It's called a macule. Under there has to be macule and patch. So macule is small lesion, patch is a larger lesion. But now everything which is flat generally we label it as a macule. So a flat lesion is a macule. Classical example is vitiligo, which presents as hypopigmented or depigmented macules. So here what you have is a raised lesion. So it's small, raised, solid. Good. So that's called a papule. Okay. So it's a raised lesion, we call it a papule. If it is spread over a larger area, so papule is something like this. Sorry. ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു സംഭവമാണ് പാപ്യൂൾ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. ഓക്കെ. So instead of that, if you have something like this, what do you call it? That raised on, but it's spread out over a larger area. What would you call it? Very good. So you call it a plaque. And that is what you typically get in a case like psoriasis. Okay. So there you get a plaque. So difference from papule is only the size. Papule is of the plaque is spread out over a large area. And typical example of a plaque is psoriasis, where you have edematous scaly plaques, mainly on the extensor surfaces. Okay. So papule plaque. Now the other situation is when you have a lesion which is something like this, either assuming that this is skin surface. So skin in a male korchundi, and there is something below the skin which may not be necessarily seen, but you can palpate it. So it's something like a ball in the skin. So adinendu varum. Very good. So that's called a nodule. Okay. So example of a nodule would be something like this. Soft nodules, multiple, as you see in neurofibromatosis. Okay. So macule, papule, plaque, nodule. Okay. Now coming to fluid filled lesions, so something similar to uh, the papule plaque story. So you can have a small fluid filled lesion which has clear fluid. You can have a large fluid filled lesion, and you can have a lesion which contains pus. So instead of clear fluid, it is showing visible pus. Okay. So going one by one, what do you call this type of lesion? So a small fluid filled lesion, like you get in chickenpox. It's called a vesicle. Good. And when it contains pus, yes, we call it a pustule. And what about when it is large? So clear fluid, not small like you see over there. Instead, it's a big, large lesion. It's a big blister. So very good. So that's called a bulla. Okay. So which is why in some conditions are called vesiculobullous condition, because you have both vesicles and bullae. Okay. So vesicles, like you see over here in chickenpox. Bullae, like you see over here. Example would be things like bullous lymphoid and pustule. And you have visible superficial pus, like you get in this condition, which is pustular psoriasis. Okay. So these are the main lesions which you just need to know to kind of understand the description. But there are a few other things which quickly we'll go through. Any redness of the skin is called erythema. This white flake of keratin, which we get in a lot of conditions, basically called a scale, and the process of scaling is called exfoliation. So scale, exfoliation. Then in the varam. So here the story is that there was a bulla had a roof of OTP. And what is left behind is a small, raw area of skin, which is very superficial. Very good. So that's called erosion. And how is an erosion different from an ulcer? So erosion and ulcer, how is it different? The basic difference is that erosion is superficial. It tends to heal good, tends to heal without scarring, while an ulcer is more deeper. Okay. Good. So erosion and ulcer. Okay, what is this and what is the diagnosis? So now we'll go to the diagnosis also. So what is the lesion called and what is the diagnosis? Very good. So the lesion is crust. So when you have inflammation in the skin, you have the fluid coming out and that gets dried. And that fluid is called crust. In this particular condition, yes. So you're seeing crust, and if you look at the typical description, this is described as a honey-colored crust. Okay. And that honey-colored crust is typically seen in wood. So this is very commonly seen in children. Face is a very common state. This is impetigo. Good. And this should be easy. So diagnosis is very easy. Then diagnosis. Very common condition? Yes. So acne. And what is the typical lesion of acne? Good. Dr. Sonia. So comedone. So you're seeing comedones over here, which can be either open or closed. And the difference is that open comedone is partly open. So air enters, it oxidizes the material and seems to make it darker. While white head or the closed comedone is completely closed. So basically, black head is open comedone and white head is a closed comedone. And these are the typical lesions of acne. Okay. So acne, comedones. Any decrease or absence of hair from an area which is normally hairy is called alopecia. Okay. So this is alopecia. Alopecia, good. And this one, sometimes you get questions. So basically, what you're seeing is redness, right? But now the question is, how do you know that it is petechiae and not just erythema? Dr. Samir, good. So it is petechiae, but if you need to differentiate it clinically, what do you do? Very good. So you put a glass slide, you apply pressure, and if you see it's blanching, then it's just erythema. If it is not blanching, then it is petechiae. It means it is bleeding into the skin, which leads to the discoloration, which is known as petechiae. So small lesions of petechiae, larger lesions will be ecchymosis. This test has a name. Internet test we glass slide to press blanch that is called very good. So that is called diascopy. Okay. Diascopy is something which is used to differentiate between simple erythema and purpura. Okay. So small lesions of purpura are called petechiae, the larger ones are called ecchymosis. And finally, this is it under. So then the importance is that when you apply one of the medicines which we use very commonly in dermatology for a long time, topically, it can lead to this change. Either in the medicine and what is this change? Very good. So steroid, and what is this change called? Yeah, it looks like wrinkling, but specifically, what is it called? It's called atrophy. Very good. So one of the most important side effects of topical corticosteroids that we are worried about is what we call atrophy. And which is why you need to choose steroids according to the potency, based on the site, based on the age, and so on, because we don't want to induce atrophy by using corticosteroids unnecessarily for a long duration, especially on areas like the face. Okay. So that wrinkle appearance is called atrophy. And the context is that corticosteroids, when used for a long time, can lead to atrophy. Okay. So this is just a basic idea of the primary lesions. Now, based on the primary lesions, let's see if we can answer this question. Okay. So, what they've done is they have mentioned that the lesions are grouped. That gives you a clue. The site is the lips. That gives you a clue. But they've not mentioned the lesion itself. So you need to identify the lesion and then based on that make a diagnosis. So yeah, this should be easy. Very good. So herpes labialis. So, and what gives you the clue? Number one is the lesions are basically vesicles or pustules. They start as vesicles usually, and then can show secondary pustulation. But more importantly, they're grouped together. So normally herpes items need to be grouped together. Okay. Herpes it means a creeping eruption. So appearance. So herpes zoster, herpes simplex, they tend to get grouped together. And herpes, the typical lesions are the vesicles. Herpes labialis because it's on the lips. And why not zoster? Because it's not segmental if you're talking about herpes zoster. And it is not generalized if you're talking about chickenpox. Pemphigus vulgaris presents more of placid blisters and erosions in a haphazard manner with mucosal lesions. Impetigo, like we saw before, presents typically as the truss, typically honey-colored truss. Okay, so this is herpes labialis. So what is this? Again, lesions are clear, but the clue to the diagnosis is the distribution. Very good. So again, relatively simple because the distribution still gives you a clue to the diagnosis. It's unilateral, it's dermatomal. If you look carefully, the lesions would be vesicles, crust, depending on the stage of the disease. But the distribution and dermatomal pattern gives you the clue to the diagnosis. Condition is herpes zoster. Positive organism is varicella zoster. Now, another question which they sometimes ask is, so shingles is a common term and the scientific term would be herpes zoster. The other question which they ask is that if you get a case like this, which bedside investigation can you do? I mean, theoretically, you can make a diagnosis clinically itself, but you can also do PCR, viral culture, and all. Very good. So the test which we do is called a Zang smear. And എന്താണ് Zangsmeril pitten? Zangsmer എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ നമ്മൾ ആ ഒരു വെസിക്കിൾ പൊട്ടിച്ചിട്ട് we scrape the roof and the floor and we stain it with Leishman or James stain, and then we look under the microscope. So ഈ പറഞ്ഞ conditions, that is herpes zoster or herpes simplex, labialis മാതിരി conditions, we get a common finding. എന്താണ് finding? Which is very typical. So that finding is what we call multinucleate giant cells. Very good. Okay. So Zangsmer and multinucleate giant cells. Okay. So moving on. Here again, ingate lesions in the parent. So it looks like a ring, right? So what do you call this kind of a lesion, which looks like circular? They call annular lesion. And typically, itchy lesion which looks annular, the first thing you think of is tinea. Okay. Tinea basically indicates dermatophyte infection, and dermatophyte infections are named according to the site. So, Alela umber, we call it tinea capitis. Body la umber, tinea corporis. Joints le tinea cruris. Kal tinea pedis. Okay. So, everything is dermatophyte infection. They're named according to the site. The typical presentation in the body is these ring-like lesions, which are called annular. Okay. So, whenever a question mentions annular lesions and it is itchy, first thing, think of tinea corporis. Okay. Clear? Again, any point you want me to stop, ask questions, feel free. Okay. Okay. So that was regarding general description. Now, the other thing is, you might get a couple of questions related to basic histology or histopathology, which, would be covered again in pathology and anatomy, but still, try to link it with the clinical features. So basically, you know that you have the epidermis, we have the dermis, we have subcutis. These are 3 layers of the skin. We have appendages like the epine glands, the sebaceous gland, which opens through the follicular opening. You have the hair itself. And the epidermis is further divided into 4 layers. In some areas like the palms and soles, we have the 5th layer, which is called the stratum lucidum. But otherwise, you have the top layer, stratum corneum, dead keratinocytes, the granular layer. Why? Because it has these lamellar granules. We have the stratum spinosum, and then you have the stratum basale, which is, the most important as far as the active growth of the epidermis is concerned. And in the stratum basal layer, you have melanocytes, which transfer the pigment to the keratinocytes. Okay. So this much is the basic story. So now, this was one question which was asked in AIMS 2017. They've given a picture, and the question is, which of these layers has an abundance of desmosomes? Okay, so A, B, C, or D. And they've not mentioned the name of the layer. So first of all, you need to figure out which layer is which. And then you need to say which one of those has the desmosomes. Okay. Right. So again, think of the question. So, right. Any other opinion? Okay. So AJ 64. And Nevin says B. Soumya says corneum. Anybody else? Any other opinion? So again, think of what we discussed before. So namlu parnanda adyam ettum mele you have the stratum corneum, right? The granular layer is slightly kind of darker. So that is the B over here. Then you have the stratum spinosum over here, and then you have the basal layer. Okay. So now once more, which one do you think? A, B, C, or D? C. Good. Stratum spinosum. And the clue is, എന്താണ് ഈ desmosome എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ സാധനം? So നമ്മൾ basically stratum spinosum എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ, why is it called stratum spinosum? Because ഇതിലെ layers, if you look carefully, it has these spines. Okay. And these spines are nothing but the desmosomes which are kind of attaching to other cells. ഈ ഒരു സ്പൈനി അപ്പിയറൻസ് ഉള്ള ഈ ലെയറിന് സ്ട്രാറ്റം സ്പൈനോസം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. ആൻഡ് സിൻസ് ദ സ്പൈൻസ് ആർ ബേസിക്കലി ഡെസ്മോസോംസ്, സോ ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് വേർ മോസ്റ്റ് ഓഫ് ദ ഡെസ്മോസോംസ് ആർ ലിക്വിഡ്, റൈറ്റ്? സോ സ്ട്രാറ്റം സ്പൈനോസം, the second layer from below, is the area where you get the abundance of desmosomes. And it is because of that itself, the name is given as stratum spinosum. Okay. Just to reinforce that, one more question. It should be easy now. Okay. Is it an answer in the? Right. So again, the same thing. So prickle or in the spine or in the same reason because it has these processes, spiny processes, which are nothing but the desmosomes. And because of that, it's called the spinosum layer or the prickle cell layer. Okay. Good. Now, within the clinical significance is the desmosomes can be affected in a number of skin diseases. Okay. One of the most common conditions in which it is affected is this condition, which can present as bullous lesions on the skin. Good. Very good. So this is pemphigus. Okay. And in the pemphigus desmosomal attachments, because of the autoimmune process, they get destroyed. And that leads to a blister formation in this layer. Okay. So number one, pemphigus, the blistering is intraepidermal. It is within the epidermis because you have the basal layer below this. It's happening in the stratum spinosum. What is getting destroyed? Desmosomes are getting destroyed. What is the antigen within the desmosomes which is targeted? Any idea? So an antigen, pemphigus. Very good. So you have desmoglein. You actually got desmoglein 1 and 3, and both can be affected. But basically, it is desmoglein. Okay. So remember that it is desmoglein, which is antigen. Remember that these desmoglins are part of the desmosomes, which are the things which are joining the cells together in the stratum spinosum. For pemphigus, desmoglin against antibodies, remember, it destroys the desmosomes. The cells are separating. That leads to the blister formation. Okay. This typically is described as a row of tombstones appearance. And that has been asked once in one of the questions. And why row of tombstones? Because they look like, tombstones. So a row of tombstones appearance. So this is pemphigus. Okay. Right. And just to show you once again, so this is the normal spiny layer cells, and these are the desmosomes. And pemphigus, because the spines are affected, these cells become large, rounded cells without the spines, which is called acantholytic cell. Acantho means spine. Acantholytic no spine adichu. So acantholytic cell. But pemphigus, we നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞ ആ ടെസ്റ്റ് എന്ത് ടെസ്റ്റാണ് നമ്മൾ വെസിക്കുലർ ബുള്ളസ് കണ്ടീഷൻസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ടെസ്റ്റ്? We said we'll do a test. Let's say test for herpes, zoster and all. Good. So our Zang smear pemphigus le cheyidal endu kittum? Good. So Zang smear, and if you do that in pemphigus, what do you get? So that is where you get good. Never very good. So Zang smear cheyumbo you get this acantholytic cell. So that's a connection. Okay. So basically the whole process is in the spinous layer. The desmosomes are getting affected, and result is you get the blistering. And if you do a Zang, in the Zang you get this acantholytic cell. Okay. So that is pemphigus. Good. Okay. Moving on. Now, just quickly, the bullous diseases questions basically moon areas now, most commonly. So you have pemphigus, which we discussed. You have bullous pemphigoid, and you have got dermatitis herpetiformis. Okay. Other than that, common is between pemphigus and bullous pemphigoid. So, simple thing to understand is that bullous pemphigoid is subepidermal. The target antigen is the hemidesmosome. So, the separation is much deeper. So, the whole epidermis is above and the rest is below, while pemphigus is intraepidermal. So, just think of it like, so this is pemphigus. You can see the roof is thin, while in bullous pemphigoid, since it is subepidermal, it has got a thicker roof. Okay. So this whole thing is a roof over here. So it's something like this. So pemphigus is a thin bubble, while if you think of bullous pemphigoid, the upper part, the roof is thicker. It's like a basketball. So obviously, which one will burst easier? Pemphigus or bullous pemphigoid? Simple logic. ചുമ്മാ ഈസി ആയിട്ട് പൊട്ടുന്ന ഇതാണ്. Obviously. Okay. Which is why pemphigus will present more with erosions. അതായത് അതിൽ ഇമ്പാക്ട് bullous lesions അധികം കാണില്ല. കാരണം so thin that it just bursts very easily. So patients usually present with more of erosions, and additional factor is that they have oral lesions. Okay. So patient coming with extensive erosions, just a few flaccid bullae and oral erosions, think pemphigus. Patient presenting with itching and this kind of large tense bullae, think of the basketball. You think of bullous pemphigoid. Okay. Another way of remembering it is that bullous is below pemphigus. So B below, pemphigus is above. Okay. So erosions കൂടുതലാണ്, you think of pemphigus. If you have intact, tense, large bullae, you think of bullous pemphigoid. Okay. And another thing which is often asked in the exam is this Niki's kind. Either usually pemphigus just think of it like a boiled potato. നമ്മൾ പൊട്ടറ്റോ ബോയിൽ ചെയ്തിട്ട് നമ്മൾ സ്കിന്ന് ജസ്റ്റ് പ്രസ് ചെയ്ത് കൊടുത്താൽ യു ഹാവ് ദിസ് it peels off easily. So this kind of thing is seen in pemphigus. Okay. Positive Nikolsky sign is seen in pemphigus. It is also seen in some other condition, but not in bullous pemphigoid. This is one thing which can help to differentiate between pemphigus and bullous pemphigoid. Okay, now just to close out the bullous lesions quickly. Now, a patient, when they come with vesicular bullous, suspected vesicular bullous disorders, the four things which we look quickly to kind of differentiate between them, which is what you will need to do in the exam, is history, clinical features, obviously, Zank's mean, which we talked about, histopathology, and the confirmatory test is immunofluorescence. Immunofluorescence is the importance in the it is not enough to know where the blister is. You also need to know which antibody and where antibody is deposited. Okay. So, for example, pemphigus typically the immunofluorescence shows this kind of a fishnet pattern. The antibody is IgG, and it is distributed throughout the epidermis, which is logical because it's basically an intraepidermal disease. Okay. While bullous pemphigoid, the Ig is deposited mainly on the basement area, which is where the hemidesmosomes are located. Okay. And this immunofluorescence is basically the confirmatory test. So it is not enough to just do a biopsy. You also need to do a direct immunofluorescence to confirm the diagnosis. So any patient with suspected vesicular bullous disease, clinical history, examination finding, Zank's smear, histopathology, immunofluorescence. Okay. I won't go into the details of this, but I'll share the PPT with through Dr. Sapna anyway, so you can go through it in detail later. But just a few small points. So, pemphigus bullous already parna. Dermatitis herpetiformis the vyathyasam varunnu instead of large bullae or large erosions, you get small papulovesicles. So lesions are small. Second feature is that the itching is very severe. So BH or dermatitis herpetiformis, small papulovesicles, severe itching. Site is the extensor surfaces mainly. So areas like the knees, elbows, back, and so on. And very importantly, normally idellam autoimmune blistering diseases. And so usually autoimmune blistering disease, what is the commonest drug which would be used in all these conditions? Autoimmune and their blistering disorders. So which is the commonest drug? Very good. So steroid addict, although there are other immunosuppressants also. Dermatitis herpetiformis, the difference is that the drug of choice for DH is not steroids, but is anybody? Very good. So it is Dapsone. Okay. So Dapsone is the drug of choice, and this one other key point which is useful in the exam is that DH has an association with what? Some systemic condition which can be associated with dermatitis herpetiformis. No, that is that is actually impetigo herpetiformis. So that is slightly different. Very good. So celiac disease. Okay, so gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. Okay, good. So So basically, നിങ്ങളുടെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യനിൽ എവിടെയെങ്കിലും you find these points, അതായത് papulovesicles, severe itching, gluten sensitivity, നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എന്തെങ്കിലും കണ്ട immediately think of dermatitis optiformis, and അവിടുത്തെ difference is the treatment is dapsone, not steroid. Okay, so same points are you will be able to cover most of the questions related to vesicular bullous conditions. Okay, now quickly just see if you can try to answer some of these questions. Okay, we won't spend much time. Very good. So large subepidermal bullous is typically BP. Okay, bullous pemphigoid. Okay. Okay, slightly more detailed scenario. Very good. So again, like we said, key points are listed. So dermatitis optiformis, very severe itching, that kind of makes you think of dermatitis optiformis. Papulovesicles would be the other clue. Extensive surfaces, the site involved would be the other clue. Histopathologically, again, the antibody is IgA, but then even if you don't know that, you'll be able to reach to the diagnosis. Okay, so here answer is dermatitis optiformis. Nicholson sign typically positive in good, perfect. Pemphigus. Okay, pemphigus is very superficial. So അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ നമ്മൾ ചുമ്മാ അങ്ങ് പ്രസ് ചെയ്താൽ തന്നെ താനെ ഇളകി പോകും, like the peel of the potato. So pemphigus. And dapsone is the drug of choice in? Very good. Dermatitis optiformis. Okay. So ബാക്കി എല്ലാത്തിലും we generally give steroids, bullous pemphigoid, pemphigus, and epidermolysis bullosa, acquisita. But in dermatitis optiformis, drug of choice is dapsone. Again, same answer. So gluten sensitivity, think of dermatitis optiformis. Very good. Okay, this we have not discussed, but see if you can answer it. So, very good. AJ64, എന്താണ് പേര്? You want to share your name? Okay. So, yeah, Naga, yeah. Very good. So, basically, one condition which is not asked that frequently, but still rarely can be asked is epidermolysis bullosa acquisita. So, this is a typical feature. Injury out of blister. And why does that happen? That happens because there's a problem with the collagen. So here basically the autoantibodies are against collagen in the basement membrane, and the name can be a bit confusing because there is also epidermolysis bullosa congenita, which is a congenital disorder. Adilum defect is basically one particular type can be related to collagen, but it is not autoimmune. While epidermolysis bullosa acquisita is autoimmune, there are antibodies against collagen, and typical presentation is bullous lesions, areas of friction and trauma. Okay. Okay. So, okay. So, bullous diseases, any questions or can we move ahead? Can we move ahead or and any questions related to bullous diseases? Okay, right. Okay, so Nevin has a question. So, bullous pemphigoid, again, think of where the antigen is located. Bullous pemphigoid, the antigen is in the hemidesmosomes. Okay, every hemidesmosome that is in the basement membrane area. So, that split is over there. Okay, and antibody deposition basement membrane zone learn the fluorescence. Okay, and whole reason link it to the pathogenesis. Pathogenesis is hemidesmosome. Hemidesmosome is located in this area. So, split. Okay, it is basically subepidermis. So, whole epidermis is above that, and the rest is below. Is that clear, Nevin? Or right. So, it is basically inside the basement membrane. So, why I can go to detail in that is because the basement membrane area, there are two conditions which can come similar. So one is this bullous pemphigoid, and the other is the epidermolysis bullosa acquisita. Okay. Other palpably differentiating part because you need a special thing called the salt split technique and all those things. So For the exam, just remember that you have pemphigus, bullous pemphigoid, dermatitis herpetiformis, right? Pemphigus, erosions, placid bullae. The whole thing is within the epidermis. Bullous pemphigoid, DH is actually subepidermal, and it's epidermisly value pathology. It starts from the basement membrane zone. And the difference between bullous pemphigoid and DH is in the presentation itself. So DH, instead of tense bullae, you get these small papulovesicles. Itching is more severe, gluten sensitivity, plus the response to dapsone. Okay. Okay. And any point you have something which we are not able to answer because of shortage of time, just send me an email. Okay. And we'll try to reply on that. Okay. Okay. So going ahead. Now, the second part is related to the pigmentation thing. 2 hours is not easy to, sit continuously. So any point you want to break, let me know. Okay. Yeah. So here the answer is very good. So it is 36 keratinocytes. So basically you have a concept of something called the epidermal melanin unit. And the idea is that each melanocyte, the basal layer ഒരു 10 cell melanocyte and ഈ ഒരു melanocyte roughly 30 to 40 keratinocytes supply. So that whole thing is called a epidermal melanin unit. So 1 is to 36 is the classical answer. Okay, although it's not exactly what 1 is 36 for all units, but that is the classical answer. Now, pigmentary disorders, again, in your exam, there are a few things which are recurrently asked. So, adilo one is, of course, vitiligo. The other is something called pityriasis alba. Pityriasis versicolor, which actually is not a pigmentary disorder, but it's an infection. These are probably the commonest things which are asked in hypopigmentation. And then hyperpigmentation, you have a few nevi. So one is nevus aorta and ito, Becker's nevus, tangential melanocytic nevus, semen, and sometimes something called Mongolian spot. So if 3 items are now, you'll be able to cover this problem. Okay, so just going to the questions, let's see if we can. Okay, so the important things which point to the diagnosis, one is, okay, to a certain extent, the age of the boy, faintly hypopigmented, fine scaling, sight is the face. No other information is given, but based on this much, in the variant. Good. So another question would be, why is it not leprosy? Very good. So scaling is not a common feature of leprosy. It can happen in some reactions and all, but as a default, scaling is not a very common feature. Why is it not vitiligo? Why not vitiligo? Very good. So again, early vitiligo can be hypopigmented, but as a rule, when you're talking about vitiligo which is established, it is depigmented, not hypopigmented, and there also it is not scaling. Okay, so scaling and the hypopigmentation, especially when this specifically mention it is faintly hypopigmented, then you would think more of pityriasis alba. In the pityriasis, the word pityrion is the Greek word for bran. Bran is aval. Our type of brani scaling conditions is labeled as pityriasis. So pityriasis versicolor is a fungal infection where you get that kind of scaling. Pityriasis alba is kind of like an eczema with that kind of scaling. And alba means white. Dermatology, Latin period, you'll understand or you'll be able to guess the answers to a certain extent. So pityriasis alba, so white lesion with scaling. Think of pityriasis alba. Here actually it can also be pityriasis versicolor with this information alone, but usually pityriasis versicolor face is not a very common site, usually a truncal lesion. But The other question would be, how can you confirm that it is not pityriasis versicolor, or what is the bedside test for all these superficial fungal infections? So basically, if you are confused whether it is pityriasis versicolor or pityriasis alba on the face, very good. And never, yes. So you just take a scraping and you do a potassium hydroxide smear, KOH smear, and you will find the typical fungal elements in pityriasis versicolor, while you will not get that in pityriasis alba. Okay. So versicolor, leprosy, pityriasis alba, and ectofacial vitiligo. Okay. Again, even if you have no idea of the options, which one would you guess? You would get C, because the parent and anemic is. So basically, remember that auto and ito are two types of the same kind of nevus. So the only difference between auto and ito is that the site. So auto is around the eyes, ito is around the shoulders. Okay. But dark nevus, the pigmented nevi. Because nevus again is a pigmented nevus, usually seen on the shoulders and in the upper arms. Nevus anemicus is a nevus which is associated with hypopigmentation, and the anemicus probably gives you a clue even if you're not really sure of the condition. So neatly remember that there is a lot of informed guessing needed. Mikya cases you'll be able to kind of rule out at least one or two options, and the rest you need to guess, and more often than not you will be right. So the guess here. So here it is, nevus anemicus. Okay, a slightly more difficult question. So this is one of the questions where an image is shown. This again, I think it was asked in NEET or in, I'm not sure. But again, for the descriptive question, if there is only an image, try to put the image into words. That might help you. So, for example, the lesion is basically a macule, right? The color, they have described it as hypopigmented, but what would you describe this as? Is it only hypopigmented, or is it slightly more? So here, probably you would probably call it depigmented. It's almost white in color, and if that is the situation, good, it will be depigmented. So, what diagnosis are you thinking about? What would your diagnosis be? It would be vitiligo. Good. So basically, now the question is, topical items which is not used in vitiligo. Now, vitiligo pathogenesis in that. What is the pathogenesis of vitiligo? There are a lot of theories, but what is the most accepted theory? So what is the pathogenesis of vitiligo? Good. So there are a lot of theories, but basically it is said that it is autoimmune, that antibodies against the melanocytes. So part of the treatment is to suppress that autoimmunity. Part of the treatment is to stimulate whatever melanocytes are there to produce more melanin. Okay. So one side in basic autoimmunity suppression. At the side in patch, there are a few melanocytes. So you're kind of stimulating them to produce more melanin. Right. So if that is the case, can you use clobetasol? Clobetasol basically is a steroid, right? So immunosuppression and the UCM term. Yes or no? You can, although it's a very potent steroid, but yes, you can still use it for immunosuppression. What about tacrolimus? Yes, no. Your diagnosis is vitiligo. We said that pathogenesis is autoimmune. Again, yes, because tacrolimus again is a calcineurin inhibitor and it's an immunomodulator. So that is one of the mainstays of the treatment of vitiligo. Methoxyline, what does it do? Is it used in vitiligo? Methoxyline belongs to the group called psoralins. Okay. Psoralins are plant derivative which used to be combined with UVA or with sunlight, and this combination used to be called the PUVA treatment if it's with UVA, or PUVA sol if it was sunlight. Okay. Psoralin plus UVA. Adile oru type aanu methoxyline. So do you think that would be useful in vitiligo? Yes or no? Definitely. So why? Because actions are, but one is it can directly stimulate melanocyte to produce more melanin, and it also has an immunomodulatory action. So it can cause T cell apoptosis. So our vitiligo will help him. So basically, all these can be used. What does not have a major role in vitiligo is retinoid. So the better answer over here would be topical retinoids. The one given here is retinoid. So B would be the answer. Okay. So now quickly again, going through those common conditions. So face hypopigmented lesions are the So this one, they are faintly pigmented, faint hypopigmentation. Scaling is there, scaling but yeah, good. That is pitches alba. Here, this one is slightly more well-defined. The scaling is slightly more pronounced. This is pitches vesicle. Okay. And again, it is very difficult to differentiate this sometimes clinically. So you have to do a KOH smear. Okay. And pitches vesicle KOH typically. What finding do you get on the KOH and pitches vesicle? Very good, Dr. Betsy. So you get a typical appearance which is called the spaghetti and meatball appearance. Okay. So you have the short hyphal forms which look like spaghetti, and you have the yeast forms which look like meatballs. And this is malassezia. Okay. So it is vascular, it is alba, and the difference is it is going to depigmentation. It's much more well defined. There is actual depigmentation happening. So you would think of what? I think of vitiligo. Very good. Okay. So moving on. Good. So basically remember that the rate limiting enzyme in the synthesis of melanin is tyrosinase. Okay. Other significance is in different ways. So tyrosinase is genetically deficient and it can lead to albinism. Second thing is, if you can inhibit tyrosinase, that can help in treating disorders of hyperpigmentation. So which is why in conditions like melasma, one of the treatments is what we call hydroquinone, which basically is a tyrosinase inhibitor. Okay. So that is the both ways you can correlate. So genetically deficient can lead to albinism. And on the other side, for disorders of pigmentation, one of the treatment is tyrosinase inhibitors like hydroquinone. So tyrosinase. Okay, slightly more difficult. Again, image based. So again, try to describe the image. So in the Kanana order, basically. Okay. So again, this is slightly difficult, but then just remember the key points. So yeah, good. So the key points over here is that it's slightly brownish in color. So hyperpigmented. The site is the shoulder and the upper back. And the age of onset is around adolescence. Okay, so late puberty, adolescence, and onset. These three factors in the first thing you need to think of is Becker's nevus. Okay. Becker's nevus is a condition in which you get hyperpigmented nevi, which typically affects arms area, slightly brownish in color. And very important thing is that typical onset is during adolescence. So puberty and intern start here. There is a certain stage where you grow in. Okay. So this is Becker's nevus. Okay. Again, our key points are Chandi. That'll be easy to remember. So these are the common things which are asked in hyperpigmented disorders. So the hyperpigmented. We'll start with the easy one. So what is this? Female patient, usually postmenopausal or during pregnancy, brownish or sometimes slightly more bluish. Very good. So that is melasma. So typical site is the cheek areas, but we can also get mandibular melasma or head melasma. Epidermal melasma is more brownish, while dermal melasma is slightly more bluish gray. and more common females, but can occur in males also. This one we already discussed. So key points on the brownish in color, the shoulder, upper arms, typically onset is in adolescence and can be associated with hair. That is Becker's nevus. Good. So that is the one which we discussed now. Becker's nevus. Okay. So our side to adolescent or late adolescent onset, that kind of gives you the clue to think of Becker's. This one again has hair, but more importantly, it is congenital. It is darker in color. So that is CM. Very good. So congenital melanocytic nevus. Congenital because it's from birth usually. Hair is a very prominent feature. It can sometimes affect almost the whole body, something like what we call the bathing trunk nevus, and so on. So congenital melanocytic nevus. And these two items which are remaining, either nevus of Otta and Ito period. So random, they're examples of dermal melanocytis. Yeah. And Otta is around the eyes. So just think of Otta eyes. Okay, Ananda Otta, the eyes, nevus of Otta. While Ito is around the shoulder area. Okay, it has a very long Latin pair kind of, but forget about that. Just remember that nevus of Otta is a dermal melanocytic nevus, which is around the eye area, can affect the eyes also. While the other one is something similar, but the site is in the acromial clavicular area. Okay, so nevus of Otta, nevus of Ito. Okay, so then I forgot about the ABCD. Yeah. So very good. So very simple. You see this kind of bluish pigmentation. Eyes are also involved. You can see the pigment over here. You think of nevus of Otta. Okay. If it comes on the acromial clavicular area, you think of nevus of Otta. Okay. Okay. So that was basically a short run through pigmentary disorders. So any questions? Okay, right. Okay. Yeah, Vishnu, what we'll do is that DH, last time DH explain. That's okay, right? Yeah, melanoma also. Okay, so melanoma actually, we will try to cover malignancies actually in the next session. BCC melanoma, squamous cell carcinoma, cover. Okay, right. Okay, so just to give a small break. The irony chatamari. So one guy is playing with lightning. The other is this female. The third is this guy. So is that number one? Very good. Benjamin Franklin. The lady? That should be easy, right? No one? Good. Kim Kardashian. And this person? Good. Still. So, and then a connection between these three people. So, you have Ben Franklin, you have Kim Kardashian, and you have Joseph Stalin. Is there something connected to all these? Yeah, Stalin is Russian, but Benjamin Franklin was American. So, Mantella common. Kim Kardashian, I'm not sure where she belongs to originally, but. So, the common thing is that apparently all of these people had psoriasis. Okay. And just to show that psoriasis is a very common condition. You don't need to have full-blown psoriasis in all its glory, but mild forms can occur very commonly. And that brings us to the next part of our session, which is called papillosquamous disorders. So, endani papillosquamous. These lesions we already said. These small bumps are called papules. Scale. So there are a few conditions which can present with a combination of these. So they're basically lesions which are raised, like papules, and they're scaly. Okay. So these conditions are called papillosquamous disorders. ഈ പാപ്പുലോസ്കോമസ് ഡിസോർഡേഴ്സിൽ നിങ്ങളുടെ എക്സാമിന് കോമണസ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് ചോദിക്കുന്ന 3 കണ്ടീഷൻസ് ഉണ്ട്. സോ വൺ ഇസ് psoriasis, the other is lichen planus, the other is pityriasis. ഈ മൂന്നെണ്ണം കവർ ചെയ്താൽ you basically get almost any question related to papuloskomus disease. Okay. And of course, psoriasis probably is the most important among this. So we'll try to cover that a bit in detail, but very quickly. So psoriasis important points, key points which you need to remember. The most common type of psoriasis is called psoriasis vulgaris. Why is it called vulgaris? Any idea? In the vulgaris word mean? Very good. So the Latin word vulgaris basically means common. English it means ugly, but in Latin the word vulgaris means common. So which is why the most common type of acne is acne vulgaris. Most common type of pemphigus is pemphigus vulgaris. Most common type of psoriasis is psoriasis vulgaris. Otherwise called chronic plaque psoriasis. Okay. So there again it's kind of self-explanatory. So chronic, the lesions are basically plaques. And the two things which shows on the surface is redness, erythema, and scaling. So well-defined scaly erythematous plaques. Commonest sites are the extensor surfaces. So the knees, the elbow area, the lumbosacral area, and the scalp. Okay. So chronic erythematous scaly plaques on the extensor surface. Now, to understand psoriasis, just think of it pathogenesis. So basically, there are plaques, which means the skin is thick. There is redness, which indicates two things. One, dilated blood vessels, and second is inflammation. And third is scales, which indicate there is something wrong in the process of keratinization. Okay. So thickness of the skin, you have scaling, you have erythema. Erythema is due to the inflammation and the dilated blood vessels. The scaling indicates abnormal hyperkeratosis, abnormal keratinization. And the same keratinization issue also is what leads to the thickness of the skin. Okay, so itrayanam sambhavikkunnu. Now, the other thing you need to understand is why all this is happening. Okay, so again, I won't go into details, but a few things which happen over here is that the basal layer, normally it kind of moves slowly towards the top and gets converted into scaly layer, stratum corneum. Okay. Normally that's a very controlled process and it's very slow. While in psoriasis, this becomes very shortened. Okay. Second thing is that the number of basal cells which are actively dividing normally is around 60%, which means all cells are not dividing. Some are inactive, only a few cells are dividing. In psoriasis, this becomes almost 100%. And third thing is that the time taken for each cell to divide is shortened. So normally it's 300 plus hours. In psoriasis, it becomes around 36 hours. So cells are dividing faster. All cells are dividing and they're reaching up into stratum corneum much faster. Net result is that the skin becomes thick and scaly. Okay. So idana our thickness and scaliness in their garden. This process is actually driven by a T cell mediated inflammation. And now we know that the main mediators involved are things like TNF alpha, IL-23, 17, there is also some role for the JAK pathway and IL-12 also. Okay, so IL-12, 17, JAK pathway, all these things are things which are driving this whole process. So they're driving inflammation, they're driving this abnormal keratinization. So itre marnal, then the treatment part becomes easy. So again, let's go back. So skin is scaly. Okay, so normally we scaling very common thing which we give when the skin is scaly and dry. I know that this part is a bit boring and bit complicated, but just think of it as emollients. Good. So moisturizers or emollients. Okay. So basically, the scaling control, and it's not a medicine as such, but it kind of controls the scaling part. Okay. So emollients or moisturizers. Fine. The second issue is that the skin is thick. Rather, there is excess keratin. Keratin, kind of, we need to light it. Yeah, very good. So keratolytic, and which is the commonest keratolytic which we use in dermatology. Good. Salicylic acid. So now you have emollients which help with the scaling. You have salicylic acid or keratolytics which help in the hyperkeratosis. Plus, the commonest thing which we give for inflammation in dermatology topically is what? Whether it's an eczema, whether it is psoriasis, first line item, inflammation control item, we give corticosteroids, topical corticosteroids. Okay, good. So this basically would be the essential topical treatment of psoriasis. So you have emollients, you have keratolytics, and you have topical corticosteroids. Okay, and Mickey cases, localized cases, there are a few other alternatives. So, like somebody said, topical retinoids is one thing. You have Voltar, you have vitamin D derivatives like calcipotriene, you have something called diethranol. So there's a big list, but primarily emollients, keratolytic, steroid. And this is good enough for small localized lesions. Now, which situations would you go for systemic treatment? Either psoriasis, we have topical, we have systemic. In this situation, the systemic logically, the commonest thing will be what? Very good. So one complication of psoriasis which we see is arthritis. Obviously, arthritis in topical, so you have to go for systemic. So that's one thing. Very good. So body surface area, obviously, if it's a large area, it's not feasible. So large area involved, go for systemic. The third thing is extensive nail involvement. And we have something called vascular psoriasis. And in the Western world, there is also an indication where you have lesion in the face of the genital areas. That can also be justification for certain systemic treatment. So now the question is, the systemic options. So again, the same principle. So you have abnormal keratinization. You have the cells, dividing in a haphazard manner. You have inflammation going on. You have a lot of cytokines which are involved in this, like TNF alpha, IL-12, 23, 17, JAK, and all those things. So what can you give systemically? Corticosteroids, theoretically, yes. But corticosteroids have a problem in psoriasis. It controls it immediately, but the moment you stop, it flares. It becomes very bad. Okay, so as a rule, systemic corticosteroids are not used in psoriasis. They're basically contraindicated in psoriasis, except in one situation that I think we just touched before. One situation. Very good. So we use that in what we call pustular psoriasis of pregnancy. And that has a name. It is called impetigo herpetiformis. Okay. So that is the only situation where we use steroids in psoriasis systemically. Corticosteroids systemically, but otherwise corticosteroids in psoriasis are contraindicated. We don't use it. So yes, so somebody said methotrexate, which is one of the commonest first-line medicines which we use. Why? Because it inhibits cell division, it can cause apoptosis of T cells. Primarily psoriasis now is a T cell mediated disease, so it acts in a lot of different ways. Very cheap drug, easy to use, good experience, so we know the side effects, we know how to handle it. So this is usually the first line. Yes, immunosuppressants like what? Okay. So methotrexate probably will be number one. Number two is something called acitretin, which is a systemic retinoid. Retinoids basically act by normalizing the keratinization process, and it has also got an anti-inflammatory action. So that is number two. Other immunosuppressants, like you said, so you've got cyclosporin, you've got mycophenolate mofetil, big list. Okay. And like Nevin said, the new group of medicines which we use a lot in conditions like psoriasis, inflammatory bowel disease and all is what we call the biologics, where we are targeting specific cytokines, usually by using monoclonal antibodies. So we have now got drugs which target all of these things which are pathogenic in psoriasis. So we've got anti-TNF alpha, we've got anti-IL-12/23, we've got IL-17 antagonists. All these things can be targeted. So one example is anti-TNF alpha drugs like adalimumab. Okay. So anti-TNF alpha. We have also got JAK inhibitors, Janus kinase inhibitors, like tofacitinib. Good, very good. Okay. So usually in detail, but just to be aware that we have this concept called biologics, which can target specific cytokines. Okay. Okay. So that basically is the treatment part. Now, again, just quickly rushing through. So most common clinical type is chronic plaque psoriasis, erythematous scaly plaques, extensor areas, well-defined, what we already saw. Now, there is a clinical sign which is often asked for the NEET exam. So, lesions scrape, you get small bleeding points. And that sign has a name, very good. That's called the Auspitz sign. Okay. So, basically, scalar initially you get a small shiny membrane-like thing, and you get the small bleeding spots, and that is called the Auspitz sign. Okay. That process is also called the Grattage sign or the Auspitz sign. The second thing is this. Yes, good. The membrane is called the Berkeley's membrane. Okay. Psoriasis, lichen planus, vitiligo, conditions, any injury or trauma can lead to new lesions along the lines of trauma. So, scratch or lesions. Very good. So, Ria, that's called the Koebner phenomenon. Okay. So, Koebner phenomenon. And yes, and the Mumbai, I think, so yeah, so candle wax sign is considered to be an early part of the Auspitz sign. So Auspitz in the first part is sometimes referred to as the candle wax sign. And this is called the Koebner phenomenon. So it can be seen in psoriasis, it can be seen in vitiligo, it can be seen in lichen planus. Okay, now here, this is psoriasis. So biopsy, this is psoriasis. You can see that, the skin is kind of elongated over here, what we call as the reader ridges. There is dilated blood vessels that are Soumya, that Berkeley's membrane is initially scrape you get a smooth membrane-like thing or a shiny structure. That is called the Berkeley's membrane. Adum scrape bleeding spots. That first thing is called the membrane. The second part is the Auspitz sign. Okay. Very good. So this is called inverse psoriasis or flexural psoriasis. And what is missing over here as compared to the normal psoriasis? The one thing which is, kind of strikes you as not being there as compared to normal psoriasis. The scaling. Okay, very good. So scales is basically because that area is sweaty because of the moisture. The scales get masked. So often this tends to get mistaken for fungal infections. But basically it is psoriasis. Okay, so this is called flexural psoriasis. So scenario might be that, patient has a red lesion on the axilla. Biopsy shows psoriasis-like features. So which form of psoriasis is ABCD? Answer is flexural or inverse psoriasis. This is called flexural psoriasis or inverse psoriasis. And this is easy. This is called palmoplantar psoriasis. Sometimes psoriasis can come only on the palms and soles. That is called palmoplantar psoriasis. Okay. Okay. Now, this is often asked in the exam. How is it different? Good. And we are still talking about psoriasis. So, compared to normal psoriasis, what strikes you as being different? Different as compared to the previous cases we saw as psoriasis vulgaris. Very good. So as Soumya said, the lesions are, more of smaller papules-like lesions rather than the large plaques. French gout means drop. Okay. The word gout refers to drop-like. Yes, scaling is there, but not as prominent as the other lesions. So the multiple small drop-like lesions are typical of what we call as guttate psoriasis. And the word guttate because the word gut, which means drop-like. Okay. So again, key points for guttate psoriasis for the exam is more common in children, usually post-streptococcal. Good. Ashika. Yes. Usually post-streptococcal and very good prognosis. So basically, there are no. So lesions are small papules, more commonly seen in children, and usually post-streptococcal. Okay. That is guttate psoriasis, and it has a good prognosis as compared to chronic psoriasis. Okay. Vidanda lesions. So you're getting this yellowish fruit-filled lesions. So what are the lesions? Obviously, good. And again, since we are in the context of psoriasis, this is pustular psoriasis. So sometimes if you irritate psoriasis, it can go into pustulation. And when it comes in a generalized manner, that is known as generalized pustular psoriasis. Okay. And one question they sometimes ask is, if you do a pus culture and sensitivity, what organism will you get? Very good. So SR56, good. So there is no organism. So it is basically a sterile pustule. It is basically just neutrophilic infiltration. Treatment is different in the sense that, pustular psoriasis is one indication for system treatment. So usually, number one, systemic coducanum. Acetretin works slightly better than methotrexate in most cases. Cyclosporin is another option. Biologicals are still an option. So main thing is generally pustular psoriasis, by default, you have to go for system treatment. Okay. So I think that answers your question, Samuel. Okay. So there's no organism. It's a sterile pustule. Okay. Exfoliative, I think or somebody mentioned exfoliative. So in that exfoliative, what is the definition of exfoliative psoriasis? Or the other word is erythrodermic psoriasis. Generally, when you say exfoliative dermatitis, it can be due to a number of causes. So psoriasis, we call it exfoliative psoriasis or erythrodermic psoriasis. It can be even due to eczema, it can be due to a lot of other conditions. Generally, when more than very good and when more than 90% of the body surface area is involved, we call it exfoliative dermatitis. Okay. So involved with erythema and scaling, or stage we define it as exfoliative dermatitis. That's psoriasis, we call it exfoliative psoriasis. Okay. Okay. This is another question which often comes. So then just remember two things. Number psoriasis nail changes. Okay. The common questions which are asked, one is remember that the most common change is good. It is pitting. Okay. So most common change is pitting. Pitting is not very specific, which means it is not necessarily seen only in psoriasis. It can also be seen in a lot of other conditions. So yes, it is very commonly seen in psoriasis, but that is not specific for psoriasis. What is specific for psoriasis is very good, is the oil drop or salmon patch kind of finding. So nail drop of oil appearance. And that is pathognomonic for psoriasis. Okay, so pitting most common, but the most specific is the oil drop side. That is good enough for the nail part. Okay, so pitting and the oil drop side. Again, arthritis. Usually the most common questions asked is which is specific for psoriasis, or what is the most classic for psoriasis, and what is the most common type. Okay. So two types of questions come on the which is common, and second is which is specific or which is classic. So psoriatic arthritis can be of different types. So you have classical psoriatic arthritis, you have rheumatoid oligoarticular psoriatic spondylitis, and mutilating arthritis. So first question is most common. Commonest type of arthritis. Very good here. So you get a few joints involved here and there, which is called oligoarticular. So remember that common is oligoarticular. articular is common. But the most classical is, as the name suggests, which is the most classical classification than classic northern. So it is DIP. The distal interphalangeal is the typical classical joint involved in psoriatic arthritis, but the most common is oligoarticulate. Okay. Okay. And one last point is regarding factors that can trigger or exacerbate psoriasis. This again is often asked. So just remember that there are few things which can make psoriasis worse or initiate psoriasis for the first time. One is cold weather. The second is drugs. In drugs, there's a big list, but the most common things you need to remember are lithium, beta blockers, and NSAIDs. Okay. These are drugs which can exacerbate psoriasis. Infection, especially streptococcal sore throat, stress, sudden withdrawal of steroids, and irritants. Like if you apply salicylic acid in inflamed psoriasis, that can something irritate, turn it into pustular psoriasis. Okay. So these are the common things which can worsen psoriasis. Dry, cold weather, drugs like NSAIDs, antimalarials, beta blockers, lithium, infections, stress, sudden withdrawal of steroids, and ocular irritants. Treatment we already discussed. So we said that the most important things are emollients, salicylic acid, corticosteroids, that is topical, systemic, retinoids, methotrexate, biologics, and there are also other options like cyclosporin, mycophenolate mofetil, and so on. Okay. Okay, now quickly, a few questions. Very good. So simple thing. So bleed scrape chamber, you get small bleeding points. Initially, you see that membrane. Then if you go further, you get the bleeding spots, which is the hospital sign. Okay. Okay. Which is not typical of psoriasis. Very good. So oozing crusting is more seen in eczema. It is not very typical of psoriasis. Commonest one. Good. So we said commonest is pitting, but the most specific thing is the oil drop sign. Okay. Again, A, so distal phalange. But the most common presentation is oligoarticular. Okay. Again, it may not be always this easy, but in general, normally MAB stands for monoclonal antibody. So that itself can give you a clue that we are talking about a biological. Okay. So adalimumab, which is an anti-TNF alpha. Okay, spot diagnosis. Itchy condition. Very good. So this is lichen planus. And lichen planus, lesions look better, but then what is missing over here, Soumya, is that it is not that red in color and scaling is not that prominent. Okay. And itching is very severe. So pruritus is a very, very prominent feature. Lichen planus, to remember it easy, you have 5 P's. And then 5 P's. The most common symptom here, color is purplish or violaceous. So purplish lesions. The most common symptom is pruritus, which is quite severe. Lesions are papules or plaques. The shape of the lesions will be polygonal, good. And the surface is planar, which means it is flat top. Okay. So purplish, pruritic, papules and plaques, polygonal, planar. So you know that you're talking about lichen planus. Okay. The word lichen itself, lichen. It came from the appearance, which kind of looks like the tree moss. Okay, I don't want to lichen. Good. So pruritic, planar, polygonal, purplish, papules and plaques. Again, key points which you need to remember that number one, etiology we are not sure. It is somewhere in between autoimmune and inflammatory. Lesions are symmetrical bilateral. Commonest areas are the flexural areas. Very importantly, mucosa can be involved. Most common being the oral mucosa, and here also you can get cognitive phenomena. Okay. So mucocellular typically you get these, whitish reticular network-like lines. Sometimes it can also go into erosions. And the importance of erosive lichen planus is that it has a small risk for malignancy. Okay. So oral lichen planus, most common, good. And that white thing is called the Wickham's stripe. You can see it on the skin lesions also. And that is called the Wickham's stripe. Okay. Cogner phenomenon can be seen here also, like in psoriasis. This is the Wickham's stripe. So skin susum, you can see those, white net-like lesions that you see over here. That is the Wickham's stripe. Nail changes correct, but the most typical nail change, which has been asked a couple of times before, is this thing, which is similar to the eye change you see over here. Good. Okay, yeah. That is pterygium. It has a wing-like appearance. And pterygium is very classical of lichen planus. So nail involvement in lichen planus, there are a lot of things, but the most, classical thing which is often asked is pterygium. It's a benign condition, self-limited, but takes a lot of time. Treatment is topical, systemic steroids, okay, depending on the severity. Okay, diagnosis. So history is very important in this condition. So typically it starts as one big lesion, which is slightly annular, ring-like with peripheral scaling. Good. And then after a few days, it starts spreading all over the body. And when it becomes generalized, it has this peculiar pattern, which is called the Christmas tree pattern. Okay, this is typical of very good pityriasis rosea. So the first lesion is called the herald patch or the mother patch because it heralds, it indicates the beginning of the disease. Okay. So first herald patch in a generalized room, and when it becomes generalized, it comes in a particular pattern which is called the Christmas tree pattern. Okay. So again, I'm going to pityriasis. Why? Because scaling is there. Rosea because the color is red. Okay. Now questions which can come is number one, the exact etiology is not known, but now the most common proposed etiology is a certain virus in the virus. And very good. So HHV 6 and 7. Okay. So you have human herpes virus 6 and 7 as the proposed etiology. Number two, this same presentation can be seen in a sexually transmitted disease. So it is very important to do a test in these patients to screen for that STD. So which STD, which test? So any patient with pityriasis rosea, you need to do a certain test to rule out a certain STD, which can present with these kind of lesions. So which STD are we talking about and which? Very good. So we are talking about secondary syphilis. And the test is the RPR or the VDR. Okay. Right. So basically, you basically know pityriasis rosea. So number one is the herald patch, the generalized distribution we call Christmas tree pattern. The scaling in the herald patch is typically described as collarate scale. Why collarate? Because it's like a collar. I'm like shirt in a collar peripherally attached and free. Okay. It is because of that collar-like pattern, it's called the collarate, peripheral collarate scales. HHV 6, 7. Then the Zanu. Which bacteria is this? What is the connection with what we discussed? Very good, Dr. Dixon. So this is Treponema pallidum. Okay, spirocate, Treponema pallidum, good. And like we said, the important thing connected is that always do VDR to rule out syphilis. Okay. Treatment is self-limited. So usually resolve. Symptomatic treatment, you can give emollients, moisturizers, antihistamines, topical steroids. Severe cases, systemic steroids, short duration, and phototherapy. Okay, so quick questions. Which of the following is true regarding resolution? Good. So simple question. So basically, it is a self-limited condition. Usually by 1 to 2 months, it resolves on its own. Okay, so treatment is basically symptomatic. Okay, second one. Very good. So the moment you either see the image of those particular whitish streaks or it is put in the description, immediately think of LP, lichen planus. Okay, good. Okay. Not a very good question, but yeah, this was also asked once, but now they've stopped asking all of the above questions. They don't ask much, but yeah. So antimalarials like chloroquine, lithium blockers, all of them can exacerbate psoriasis. We already discussed this. So the sign is called Auspitz sign. The membrane is called Berkeley's membrane. Type of psoriasis most commonly seen in children and may follow a streptococcal psoriasis. So two key pointers given. So one is children, the other is the streptococcal. The random immediately, first thing which comes to your mind is small petite lesions. So petite psoriasis. Good. This is petite psoriasis. Okay. So we discussed three plus common conditions. Pruritus is, but typically severe pruritus is a feature of lichen planus. Okay, good. So lichen planus, 5 P's itself is pruritus. Differential diagnosis of pityriasis rosea, we talked of syphilis, but with syphilis, secondary syphilis, because secondary syphilis was present as a generalized rash with lymphadenopathy and mucosal lesions. So secondary syphilis is a differential diagnosis for pityriasis rosea, and hence it's important to do a BDR. Okay. Anybody else? Same. Yeah. So again, very clear. So again, key pointers. Always in the question, look for the key pointers. So child, streptococcal infection, small lesions, good prognosis. Okay. Okay. That is psoriasis. Again, exacerbation drugs. They've asked a few times. So they ask it in different ways, but basically remember it's the same principle. Very good. So beta blockers, NSAIDs, lithium. So the same group of drugs, and here propranolol is the beta blocker. So that would be the drug we should assess. Good. This will skip. Okay. So that's the third part done. So now we have around 30 minutes roughly. Sleeping, slept, tired, questions, doubts? Okay, great. Okay, so shall we move on? Okay, great. So again, the third part, acne. So diagnosis is very simple. Acne, a few questions they keep repeating every time. So okay, we'll just go through the pathogenesis first and then we'll discuss the question. So in acne, so why do you get acne? So which structure is affected? Primarily, acne pathogens. Good. So it primarily is a disease of what we call the pilosebaceous paratus. Okay. So basically, you have the sebaceous gland that is opening out into a follicle, the hair over here. So one of the issues in acne is that this opening gets blocked. And what does it get blocked by? It is getting blocked because the epithelium over here is either not dividing normally or it is not being shed properly. Okay. So this epithelium itself accumulates over here. And because epithelium is basically made of keratin, this is called the keratin plug. Okay. So the keratin is kind of plugging the gland. I'm going to plug in, but the sebum is still being secreted. Right. So the sebum starts accumulating. So this starts enlarging like this. And in the middle of this, you have this blackish debris, which is the keratin plug. And this lesion is now called what? So something like a papule and narukachari plug in. So this lesion would now be called as what lesion? Good. It is a comedone. Okay. Or the black head or white head, depending upon whether it is open or closed. Good. But this alone would not explain the redness, right? So because you can see that with a redness and there is pustule formation now. So why does that happen? So why is there inflammation? Why inflammation over there? Usually skin. Yeah. So there is some role for a bacteria. So which bacteria are we talking about? Good. It used to be called T. acnes or Propionibacterium acnes, but now the name has changed to Cutibacterium acnes, which is basically an anaerobic bacteria. It's a commensal. It's already there in the sebaceous gland, but it accumulates, and that is what is responsible for the inflammatory component. So it breaks down the triglycerides to free fatty acids that induces inflammation. Okay. A lot of cytokines and all involved, but basically that's a story. So now when you think of treatment of acne, in the you can try to peel off this excess keratin. You can use peeling agents. You can try to normalize the differentiation over here. You can give something which kind of normalizes epidermal differentiation. You can reduce the sebum secretion, and you can target the bacteria. Okay. So we'll go with the easy part first. So bacteria targeted in the obviously, if you have bacteria, obviously antibiotics. So you have topical, systemic. Very good. So topically, most common thing which we use is clindamycin. Systemically, you've got doxy, you've got azithro, you have minocycline, and so on. So that is one part. Second part we said is this plug, keratin plug. So you have to remove it, plus you need to normalize the differentiation so that it doesn't come back again. So adana, most commonly in the chamber, doxy is also systemic antibiotic which can use. Yes. Yes, so you can use a ketonlytic. You can also use something which normalizes epidermal differentiation. One drug which works on a lot of these aspects is retinoids. Okay, very good. So you have topical, you have systemic. So retinoids in advantage in peeling action. It normalizes epidermal differentiation, so it prevents recurrence. It has an anti-inflammatory action and it has an anti-sebum action, so it can dry out the glands, which is why one of the side effects of retinoids is dryness. Okay. And which is why topical retinoids are probably the most important drug in the treatment of early acne. And in severe acne, the drug of choice is systemic retinoid. And what is the name of the drug? So severe nodulocystic acne, very good. Nodulocystic acne, the drug of choice is isotretinoin, which is a systemic retinoid, and which really works really well. So, it has very good results. But if it is so effective, why can't you give it directly? Why bother with topical and on? Ellang cases do also that. So why don't you give it? Good. Good. So one is, it is contraindicated in pregnancy, and it also got a few other issues. So it is hepatotoxic. It can cause dyslipidemia, and it is heterogenic. Okay. So if it is hepatotoxic and dyslipidemia is the main issue, which good, Mohammed, we can also call pseudotumor cerebrale. So which tests will you do before you start retinoids? You want to start oral retinoid on a patient in the test cave. Urine pregnancy test, yes, if it's a female patient, LFT, and one more thing. We said dyslipidemia. So fasting lipid profile, good. So basic investigations which we do for retinoids oral is lipid profile, LFT, and of course urine pregnancy test if it's a female patient. Topical retinoids are contraindicated in pregnancy. So although some of the newer ones like adapalene are not considered to be that dangerous, but still, as a rule, topical retinoid is also contraindicated in pregnancy. So we ideally avoid in pregnancy. Okay. Okay, so that's basically a concept of acne and treatment. And one other question which is often asked is the differential diagnosis. And two things which are commonly asked, one rosacea and one steroid acne. So how do you differentiate from rosacea? What is missing in rosacea? Very good. Okay. So rosacea versus common acne, one of the key differences is that rosacea will not show comedones. Okay. Instead, it shows something else which is not seen in acne, which basically is what gives its red color. So again, rosacea is called rosacea because the color is red. Okay. It's commonly seen in middle-aged females. Very good. So It can be triggered by stress, emotional stress, some spicy food, tea, coffee, sun exposure, and so on. And one of the prominent features, along with the papules and pustules, is the dilated blood vessels, which is called telangiectasia. Okay. Kligman's regime is something used for melasma. Okay. So Kligman's regime. Let me see if you have time. We'll just quickly go through it. So Kligman's regime എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ നമ്മൾ melasma, we said that there is hyperpigmentation, right? So pigmentation is partly because there is increased melanin production, partly because the of triggers like sun exposure and all those things. So നമ്മളിപ്പോ ട്രീറ്റ് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ on one side you need to give things like sunscreens, avoid sun exposure. On the other side you need to treat the pigmentation. So അതിന് the different approaches you can use, one is inhibit tyrosinase. The second is you can peel the epidermis where the melanin has been transferred, so that when new epidermis comes, if sun protection is adequate, the pigmentation is not that prominent. So നമ്മൾ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞതെന്ന് നമ്മൾ ടൈറോസിനേസ് ഇൻഹിബിറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്ന എന്ത് ഡ്രഗ് ആണ് കോമൺലി യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്? We talked about a drug, JB41. പേരെന്താണ്? Good, Vishnu. So the drug is called hydroquinone. Okay. So that is one thing. The second thing, what can be used as a peeling agent on the face? What we talked about in acne, something which has a peeling effect, which we said is very important in acne. Acne. You can use salicylic acid, but something which we discussed now, which acts on multiple points on acne. Retinoids. Good. So hydroquinone and retinoids. So this combination is one thing which is used in melasma. പക്ഷേ ഇത് യൂസ് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ ഒരു പ്രോബ്ലം എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ റെറ്റിനോയിഡ്സ് കൻ ഇറിറ്റേറ്റ് ദ സ്കിൻ. ഓക്കെ. ആ ഇറിറ്റേഷൻ ബാലൻസ് ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് വി ഗിവ് എ ടോപ്പിക്കൽ സ്റ്റിറോയിഡ്. അപ്പൊ ഈ മൂന്ന് സാധനത്തിന്റെ കോമ്പിനേഷൻ ഇസ് കോൾഡ് ദ ട്രിപ്പിൾ റെജിമൻ ഓർ ക്ലിഗ്മാൻസ് റെജിമൻ. Okay. Triple regimen because there are three drugs: hydroquinone, retinoid, and steroid. And the other name is the person who just described it. So Kligman. Okay. So that is Kligman's regime. It's typically used in melasma. Okay. So coming back, rosacea, female patient, middle-aged, telangiectasia, papules, pustules, central face involvement, absence of comedones. Okay. Steroid acne or drug-induced acne is typically characterized by what we call monomorphic papules. As the name suggests, all lesions look similar. Okay. Again, comedones are absent. The most common drug which can induce an acneiform eruption is corticosteroids. Good. So it's called an acneiform eruption, and the most common drug is steroids. So these are two common diseases which are often asked in the exam. So just remember that rosacea and drug-induced acne or acneiform eruption also you need to remember. Treatment we already discussed. So topical retinoids, benzoyl peroxide, antibiotics, systemic antibiotics, retinoids. And isotretinoin is a drug of choice for severe nodulocystic acne. Okay. So just discuss point, very easy, learn answer. So oral retinoids. Okay. The question is most common side effect. Most common. Okay, so after 3 year issue, because yeah. So theoretically, you can get tetrogenicity, you can also get night blindness also, but the most common issue we get is dryness. Okay. So remember that the most common side effect when using isotretinoin orally is dry skin. Good. So again, a lot of pointers over there. So female patient, triggers, so worse on sun exposure. And although say erythematous papules, you can also see that prominent redness because of the telangiectasia. So immediately you think of rosacea, and the comedones are absent. Okay. So rosacea. Okay. So we have, I think, 15 minutes. So we just try to cover this last part quickly. In the yeah, good, Dan. So just before that, okay. So we'll go through it quickly. So any inflammation in the skin is called dermatitis, right? So like any inflammation in the liver is called hepatitis. So one issue is we always have a question of whether dermatitis and eczema are the same things because we often use the words interchangeably. So seborrheic eczema or seborrheic dermatitis, atopic eczema or atopic dermatitis. Basically, dermatitis is a broad term, while eczema is one kind of dermatitis. So we have a common phrase which we use, which is that all eczema is a dermatitis, but all dermatitis are not eczema. So essentially, that means that eczema is a subset of dermatitis. When do you say that an eczema is a dermatitis? Sorry, when do you say that dermatitis is an eczema? For that, you have a clinical feature and you have a histological pattern. Clinically, it is characterized by a reaction pattern which goes through acute, subacute, and chronic phases, which we'll discuss how they look like. More importantly, all eczemas have this important feature histologically called spongiosis. Okay. Entrani spongiosis. Spongiosis means the collection of fluid between the cells of the epidermis. So these empty spaces are not normal. Why do you have these empty spaces? Because fluid is collecting between the epidermal cells. And that change is the typical histological feature of spongiosis, of eczema, sorry. And why the name? Because it looks like a sponge, right? On the spongicular holes in appearance, which is why the term spongiosis came. Okay. So remember that the key point is that histological feature, which is most important in eczema, is spongiosis. Okay. And to remember this in context, the word eczema came from the word eczeme, which means to boil. Acute eczema, the skin is like it's boiling, or bubbles oozing into fluid, and the skin fully boiling the appearance. And indani boil out is basically just the spongiosis. Okay, spongiosis, the amount of food, it starts appearing as fluid, vesicles, and all those things. Right. Eczema quickly is divided into exogenous, endogenous, and according to the stage is divided into acute, subacute, chronic. Acute eczema, the inflammation is very, very prominent, which means that, oozing and crusting and edema and erythema, everything is happening over there. There's a lot of inflammation going on. Subacute means that there is only a bit of redness and scaling. So erythema, scaling. Oozing illa, crusting illa, vesiculation illa. The skin is just a bit red and there's a bit of scaling going on. Okay. Chronic eczema is like this. So if you keep rubbing an area, that area becomes slightly pigmented and it becomes thick. That change is called what? Good. That change is called lichenification. That's what you're seeing over here. Okay. So chronic eczema, the hallmark is lichenification. Okay. So now let's just quickly go through the treatment part. So what would be common in all these eczemas? Basically, eczema is there's a lot of inflammation going on, right? So again, going back to what we said, inflammation on the skin, commonest treatment type. Topical, we're talking about topical treatment. So which topical medicine? Very good, Soumya. So yeah, you can give coal tar in some cases, but then primary treatment we give for eczemas is topical corticosteroids, right? So that would be common in all these cases. So idilum godukum, idilum godukum, idilum godukum. Ivada, and in all the three actually, what is the commonest symptom? What do the patients complain of? So symptoms wise, what is the commonest symptom happening? Good. So what would you add to the treatment if there is itching? Primary mediator of itch, very good. So antihistamine. So steroids, antihistamine, now going one by one, the skin is broken. So skin so what is the risk? What can happen over here as a complication in acute eczema? Secondary infection. So what you need to add is an antibiotic. Okay. So acute eczema, you have steroids topically, you have antihistamines depending on the pruritus, plus you need to add an antibiotic to prevent secondary infection. Plus, if the oozing is very prominent, we also give something called saline compresses or saline soaps, which help to reduce the oozing and the crusting. Okay. So that is acute. Subacute eczema, you are again steroids eye, antihistamines eye, but there is also scaling. So there's a bit of scaling dryness going on. So adine endha add cheyan pattum? Normally skin dry ആവുമ്പോൾ what do you add? Very good. So you add emollients, moisturizers. Okay. So ivada basically it will be steroids, antihistamines, moisturizers. Okay. Chronic again steroids കൊടുക്കാം, again antihistamines കൊടുക്കാം, moisturizers കൊടുക്കാം. But the problem is the skin is thick. Okay, because of the lichenification. So ഈ steroid ഉള്ളിൽ penetrate ചെയ്യാൻ അത്ര എളുപ്പമല്ല. So what do you need to add to kind of reduce the thickness? Thickness is due to keratin. Very good. So you add a keratolytic. And again, we said the most common keratolytic which we use is then salicylic acid. Very good. So a simple treatment would be you combine steroid with salicylic acid and you give a moisturizer and you give an antihistamine. Okay. So this basically is the general treatment of eczema. Akshay, you also need to try to find out the trigger or the cause. So for example, eczema, again, you can use steroids, you can use antihistamines and all, but what is the cause over here? Primarily, it is something outside the body, so which is why we call it a contact dermatitis. It's due to contact with something. So you also need to avoid that particular contact or that particular trigger. Okay. So treatment of eczema, basically, you try to look for the cause, you avoid to treat the cause, plus you treat in general according to the stage. So acute, subacute, chronic, you treat accordingly. So this is summarize. So acute we said steroids, antibiotics, antihistamines, compresses. Subacute we said steroids, antihistamines, moisturizers, and chronic we said steroids, electrolytics, salicylic acid, antihistamines, moisturizers. Okay, clear? Clear Anna? Treatment? Okay, great. Now quickly, just 3 or 4 eczema which are commonly asked, and other just the key points we'll just go through. So one common thing which is asked is contact dermatitis. Okay. Contact dermatitis, what is the test used to confirm which is the antigen? So for example, a person who comes with contact dermatitis to footwear, it could be rubber. Yeah, here it is hair, right? But suppose you have a person who's coming with contact dermatitis to footwear, the rubber avam, leather avam, plastic avam. So you need to find out what exactly is causing the allergy so that you can tell them what they can wear. Okay. Very good. So there you use a patch test. Okay. So one is which is the test used, and number 2 is when do you read a patch test? Yeah. So RAST actually is for type 1 sensitivity. So that can be used for things like urticaria. Good. So although there are a few different opinions, but the most accepted answer in the NEAT thing is 2 days and 4 days. Okay. So 48 hours, 96 hours. Good. So patch test, basically what we do is we stick the antigens onto the body and we open it after 2 days, do a reading. Second reading, according to the NEAT answer is 96 hours. Okay, but some people do it even after 72 hours, but for you follow 48 and 96 hours. Okay. So the test for allergic contact dermatitis is patch testing, and the reading is 48 hours, 96 hours. Okay. Then what kind of dermatitis would this be? The clue is in the distribution. So it's on the face, the neck, what is called the B area of the neck, and it's on the dorsum of the hands. Very good. So that's called a photodermatitis. Now, if you get this dermatitis in a female patient, and patient also has got joint pains, oral ulcers, hair loss, which screening test would you do? One of the first slides which we showed today. Very good. So you do an ANA because one of the first markers for SLE could be a photodermatitis. Okay. You may not necessarily have the typical malar rash, but even a simple photosensitivity could indicate a SLE. Great. So then the dermatitis scalp involved, nasolabial fold is involved, eyebrows, beard, mustache, axilla. And all these sites are very good. These sites are called the seborrheic sites because they're rich in sebaceous glands. Typical site is the scalp. Other sites are the eyebrows, the eyelid margins, nasolabial fold, beard area, axilla, front of chest. And a dermatitis, when you see is localized to these areas, you think of seborrheic dermatitis. The difference in seborrheic dermatitis is that നമ്മൾ steroid മാത്രം കൊടുത്തിട്ട് കാര്യമില്ല, because here the etiology, there is a role for a fungus, which is why we also added antifungal to the mix of the treatment. Okay, so that is the key point you need to remember. Seborrheic dermatitis. On the side number is that etiology has a fungal part also, so treatment from the cover. Okay, and this is the commonest eczema you see in children. So commonly starts as erythematous oozy lesions on the face and the flexures. Very severe itching. Very good. So atopic dermatitis. So atopy, the concept of atopy is that a few conditions which tend to run together, either in individuals or families. So bronchial asthma, atopic dermatitis, rhinitis, conjunctivitis, hay fever. This whole thing together is called atopy. And another component on atopic dermatitis. So typically children, face is one of the common sites. Initially lesions are more oozy and wet. Gradually they become more lignified. Okay, so quickly, last few questions. Very good. So basically, the whole story is about sensitization to a particular product. Patient is developing allergy to that. So this, what we're dealing with is allergic contact dermatitis. Right? And allergic contact dermatitis, the drug of the test of choice is the patch test. And again, important thing to remember is the duration is reading is 48 hours and 96 hours. Okay. Yeah, treatment we will discuss. We'll just finish the questions and we'll discuss. Okay. Okay. So there are a few pointers over there. Very good. So child, itchy, IgE levels. So again, atopic dermatitis has a lot of hypersensitivity going on. So IgE levels are usually elevated, like it is elevated in bronchial asthma. So the diagnosis over here, the atopic dermatitis. Good. So we said that seborrheic dermatitis, although it is an eczema, there is a role for fungus in it. And fungus is actually the same thing which causes Pittosporum, which has a role in, Pittosporum versicolor. So it is Pittosporum ovale or Malassezia. Okay. So the answer is C, Pittosporum. This we didn't discuss. Probably in pharmacology, you would have probably discussed this, but just to remember, because this is often asked in different ways. So just I'll give you one key point regarding this, and then we'll stop with that. Yes, Dr. Ann, very good. So basically, just remember that steroids can be mild potent, moderate potent, and very potent. Okay, there are different classifications. Just remember that there are mild, moderate, and very potent steroids. The mildest steroid which we generally use is hydrocortisone acetate. And the strongest steroid which we use is clobetasol propionate. So just remember these two. With you'll be able to answer the questions related to the potency. Okay. So clinical application of this is that number face of a child. If you're an eczema, you would prefer going for something mild. So there you would go for hydrocortisone. You would never use clobetasol. Palms and soles, adult patient, you would go for something very potent because hydrocortisone will not really work. So there you go for clobetasol. Okay. So just remember this much, that the mildest we use generally is hydrocortisone acetate. The strongest we use practically usually is clobetasol. Beclomethasone comes in between. Okay. So there are a lot of things in between, but just remember the most and the least. That kind of gives you the information to answer most questions. Okay. So betamethasone, beclomethasone, they come in between. Okay. So this we already said. Then answer. Okay. So neat answer is 48 hours, 96 hours. Okay. Okay. So the most important histological feature of eczema is spongiosis, and that itself is a feature which explains the oozing, vesiculation, all those things. Okay. Spongiosis is the most important histological feature of eczema. Last question. Okay, right. As long as it's somewhere between A, B, and C, it's good enough. Okay. Okay, so we are at the end of time.